Hey everyone, Tony Walsh here. Welcome back to the channel. Of course, you got Jackie here with me. You can see her. So I think it was a video sometime back where I talked about her driving. So pray for me with her driving. But not only do I need prayers for her driving, we've also got a backseat driver back here in Bless Nana. Say hello, Nana. Hello, Nana. There's good. Okay. So I really need prayer for me having to spend a day and a half with these two lovely ladies. We'll leave it at that.
Now, what you think? We better have prayers.
So,
not you.
Yep. So we are actually on the way to Orlando, Florida to a meeting, and I can't remember the proper name of the meeting, but in a few videos I've talked about Nana's Uncle Hubert that was a prisoner of war and was killed in the line of duty. So we are actually going to meet with the Army to discuss Uncle Hubert's case. So when we get to that meeting, I'll see if they let me videotape. If they don't, I'll just record it without them knowing. So when you come back, we'll be in Orlando at the meeting. Sorry for the noise in the background, but we are at a meeting called the Defense POW MIA Accountability Agency, and we're at the Doubletree Hilton in Orlando, Florida. And you can see the meeting room we're at. The meeting hasn't started yet, so it's not filled up, but I'll explain more as we go on. And there's going to be a video or a presentation, so I'll film part of that, so bring you back in a few.
The Captain Porter family. Okay, Diane and Daniel, right? Okay. Then Private Pettis family. Shirley, Brenda, and Larry. Okay. Second Lieutenant Russo, sorry. Stephen and Denise, right?
Right.
Okay. First Lieutenant Schwartz family. Okay. Randall and Susan, right? Yep. Okay. Private Seawright. Okay. Lynn and April. Okay. And Staff Sergeant Sills. Stephen Pafford here. Okay. Lieutenant Colonel Vantour. You get my email then. Just in time.
I went to the wrong hill.
Okay. No problem. And Private Waters family. All right, so we have Lauren Jacqueline, right? And did Tony make it?
That's it.
You, Tony? Okay. All right, so we got everybody except for one family member.
Sills?
Yeah, Sills. So hopefully they'll show up. But I guess we'll go ahead and get started. I want to thank each and every one of you for coming today. We really appreciate each and every one of you. Without you, we couldn't make any of this happen and make all of this happen. So thank you again. My name is Paul Axum from the Army Casualty Office. If forgot to ask any questions today, don't hesitate to send me an email like, oh, I forgot to ask this question. I want to ask this question. So just anytime, just send me an email and we'll get those questions answered for you. And I'll send all your questions to DPA. They do all the hard work and all the research. They send it back to me. And I look like the good guy sending you all the information. So,
What is your email address?
I'm at Fort Knox, Kentucky. It's on that. Should be.
I see.
Yep, that's.
Okay, thank you.
So yeah, everything goes to the Army Casualty Office, and we feed everything to DPA, and then
Thank you.
work. Go ahead.
Okay. Welcome, everyone. It's a pleasure meeting all of you. My name is Greg Kupski. I'm a historian with DPAA. I'm our research lead on the Philippines, which is where the guys we're talking about started in the Philippines. So I tend to do the research on them. Dr. Maureen Justiniano, who's sitting over here, works with me on doing the research as well. Between her and myself, we did the case summaries you received, and we worked on a lot of the research kind of supporting the disinterment effort as well. So I'll just do a quick overview, just so everybody kind of has the basic facts of what happened to these particular victims of the hell ships. And then I talked to the project lead for the remains we have in the laboratory, and I'll give you the latest on that. And then happy to spend the rest of the time answering any questions you all have. All of your relatives were prisoners of war in the Philippines during World War II. And during the war, the Japanese started sending ships to transport prisoners back to Japan to work as laborers. And all the individuals we're talking about today were put on the same ship, the Oryoku Maru. There are going to be 3 ships total. Ship number 1 is the Oryoku Maru, which departed the Philippines in mid-December of 1944 with about 1,600, just over 1,600 individuals aboard, POWs. The ship was not marked. It was a POW transport. So unfortunately, U.S. naval aircraft attacked the ship multiple times as it left the Philippines. It turned back and docked. Once it docked back in the Philippines, it was attacked yet again pretty severely. The ship was abandoned. The prisoners had to swim to shore. We believe the estimate at the time was about 50 were lost in the water, in addition to those who had died on the ship during the attacks. Those brought ashore were held on a tennis court for several days, and they're trying to do a head count, figure out who survived this far. Several people perished while they were waiting on tennis courts. From this point, the Japanese took them to the town of San Fernando nearby to transport them to a different port to continue on with other ships. While they were in San Fernando, the Japanese pulled aside, we think, 15 individuals who seemed like they weren't in particularly good shape. The Japanese executed those individuals and buried them in San Fernando. From this point, they're taken to a port further north on the island of Luzon, and they're put on ships 2 and 3. This is the Enora Maru that we talk a lot about, and the Brazil Maru. These 2 ships left the Philippines, proceeded to what is now Taiwan, the port of Takao, where while they were waiting in the port of Takao, all of the prisoners were consolidated onto the Enora Maru, and on January 9th, 1945, the Enora Maru was attacked by U.S. naval aircraft, resulting in, we think, about 300 more deaths. After 3 days after the attack, the Japanese brought the prisoners ashore, allowed them to bring the dead ashore. It sounds like started cremating the remains, decided it was taking too long, and just did a mass burial on shore instead. From this point, all of the prisoners who survived were put on to ship number 3, the Brazil Maru, which continues on to Japan and arrives in Japan on January 30th. So I know this is kind of a lot of dates and so forth, but the long story short is you start with about 1,600 prisoners who board the first ship. About 400 of them survived the war. About a fourth of them survived. The rest are lost somewhere in that progression, either on the first ship, on the tennis courts, they were executed, they died en route between the different locations, some died once they got to Japan. The challenge is, as you can imagine, the records are not particularly good, so it's very hard to figure out where we lost somebody throughout this timeline. Which is why we call this the Enora Maru Project, because the largest number of remains we have to analyze come from that port in what is now Taiwan, where those burials took place on shore. The Army recovered what they believed were 407 individuals after the war from that location. Those 407 individuals were buried in the Punch Bowl in Hawaii as unknowns. And so the main part of our project is to try to identify those unknowns as people who were lost throughout this timeline. And we're casting a wide net. So if somebody was on the first ship and didn't come home, we're considering that they may have been lost in Taiwan and may be among those remains. So we tried to collect DNA for everybody lost throughout this entire story to compare against any remains we find from any of these locations. So we have 407, we think, sets of remains from Taiwan. We have 17 from San Fernando, the town where the executions took place. We have another 6 from near the tennis courts, where we believe individuals who died in the tennis courts were buried. And then we have 1 set of remains from Japan that we think was someone who was buried at sea from the prison ship as it approached Japan. And these remains washed ashore, and we think they might be somebody who was buried at sea from the final ship just before the So again, a lot of information. If you have any specific questions, I can answer them.
We're just trying to do the accounting of the 1,600 people. Those were the remains. How many people survived that day?
A total of 400 out of the 1,600 actually survived the war.
Are you the person that actually?
And we have estimates for how many we think were lost at different points, but we're not 100% sure. And we're not willing to stand on any record that says so-and-so died at this point or this point. So we're going to kind of test everybody against any set of remains.
Were there any testimonies that the Japanese threw the dead off the ship when they died?
Yes. So in particular, from between the Philippines and Taiwan, there were individuals who died along the way, were buried at sea, but essentially their remains were kind of stripped of clothing and they were committed to the sea. It wasn't a very rigorous process or anything in terms of identification. If somebody died as they approached Taiwan, they tended to be held and then brought ashore in Taiwan. Similarly, once the final ship was within 3 days of Japan, the testimony from the Japanese was that if they were within 3 days of Japan, they held those remains and brought them ashore, in which case any remains brought ashore at that point were probably cremated. But we do know there are people, and we do have testimony from prisoners that say so-and-so died 4, 5, 6 days out from Japan, and so they were buried.
And cremation means no DNA available.
In all likelihood, if they're cremated, that's kind of, from an identification standpoint, that's kind of the end of the story for that. So in terms of, real quick, and then I'll take all the rest of your questions, just real quick, I want to give you an update on where our laboratory currently is with the recoveries. So as I mentioned, we have what were 407 sets of unknowns buried in the punch bowl in Hawaii. We had another 24 buried in Manila. The ones in Manila were recovered from the tennis courts, from San Fernando, or from the individual who washed ashore in Japan. This last fall, we started the disinterments from the punch bowl. We did the first 2 from Manila as a test case to see what condition the remains were in. So as of this point, we have disinterred 95 from the punch bowl, and we'll have teams going back throughout this year to get the rest. As I mentioned, we did the first 2 from Manila. A team just arrived in Manila this weekend to get the rest over the next few weeks. So the rest of the unknowns from Manila will be coming back in the next month or so into our laboratory to undergo analysis. So we're about we've got about a fourth of the remains in our laboratory already. The plan is to get the rest into the laboratory over the course of this year to continue analysis. So good news. We'll do good news first. The good news is that the project lead in the lab has been assessing the remains that have come in, and the ones buried in the punch bowl are actually in better shape than we thought they were going to be in. Some of the remains have dental present. Some of the remains actually have material evidence with them, or things that suggest a little bit better condition, which is good news. I guess the less good news is there is some evidence of mixing among them, which means that it's going to be more of a challenge to get the DNA sampling to kind of unmix the remains that have been commingled. And the other not great news is the first 2 from Manila were not in good shape at all. So there are concerns about DNA extraction from the remains in Manila. We're still going to try. What it means is that they may have to go to next generation sequencing. If you're not familiar with that, it's kind of it's the strategy that the DNA lab uses to get DNA from remains that are the most damaged, in the worst shape. And right after this, actually in 20 minutes, the DNA briefing is starting downstairs. If you miss it, it'll be recorded. You can watch it online. But they explain kind of the different types of DNA analysis. But it looks like the ones from Manila are probably going to take longer because they'll have to do that level of DNA analysis. But at least for the guys who were recovered from Taiwan, it looks like they're actually in fairly good shape, and we're hopeful that the sampling will get us a lot of DNA results that we can get some results from, and actually, we hope, get some identifications from. And that was, this is what I got from the project lead this past week in our laboratory in Nebraska. So they're sampling, they're still doing the sampling and inventorying and sending the samples off to get DNA samples. And that'll be ongoing. It's a lot of remains. It'll probably take a couple of years as they process all of that. But, you know, we're hopeful that we'll start getting, hopefully in the next year and a half, we'll start getting matches and start actually getting results for some people. So again, lots of information. Thanks for indulging me, but I'm happy to take any questions that you all have.
I had a question regarding recovery of the remains from Formosa. So are you confident that you were able to get all the remains that are there, or is there some evidence that there still might be other remains, and is there any plans to do more digging?
Sure. So in a project like this, we always start with what we think, to see what we have so far, which is, you know, the remains in the punch bowl in Manila. But we are very curious about what's on that spot now. Was anything left behind? Has that area been developed? Is there a big dock there now? I mean, my understanding is the burials were right on the beach, or pretty close to the beach. So I don't know if development's a concern or not. Our research lead for Taiwan, actually, who's working Taiwan cases, we're trying to get in to do a visit to speak to the Taiwanese authorities and actually visit that spot to see what's there. Find out if more remains have been recovered since the war, and as a follow-on, possibly someday, maybe look into whether we want to look and see if there's more there. Without getting too much into current events, it's tricky for us to get into the island of Taiwan right now. It always has been, but we're at least trying to see if we can do a visit to ask questions and find out what that spot looks like in the present day so that we could potentially do that. So it's a very valid point that it's possible they didn't get all the remains from the beach after the war, absolutely.
The other thing too is, the stuff that I had seen before is that they essentially cremated everybody. So now you have new evidence that they weren't cremated.
So the story after the war, or I guess the original assumption, was that large amounts of the remains have been cremated. But there's a lot, especially based on what we've just interred, that's clearly not the case. And actually, I had the privilege, I was in Hawaii this last January. We were able to go out and were there when they did the disinterments from the punch bowl in January. So we were able to see the tables up in the laboratory. And all I've seen is the records and the stories of what happened, and I was shocked how much the condition and the amount of remains we were able to get. We were expecting fragments for some of the unknowns, and there's actually quite a bit there, which is good news. So we'll see what we're able to get through DNA.
So by 2025, you should have worked your way through identifying the 430 some remains we currently have.
So by the end of this year, we'll have all the remains in the lab. From that point, I would guess 1 to 2 years just to get the DNA samples out. So the identifications could take years and years and years. But we'll at least have sampling of the DNA, hopefully within 1 to 2 years. And then
So those remains will be sample-ready specimens for 2024.
yes. So yes, they're already sending out samples, and it takes a while because if we're confident that one unknown is one person, we only need one sample. In this case, we're pretty confident that a lot of these unknowns are actually multiple individuals. In fact, I'm glad this made me think of something I was going to show you. The project lead sent me this, which is an example of what they got DNA-wise from one of the first unknowns. And just so you know what we're looking at here, each color is a unique DNA sequence. So for this unknown, which was on paper one person, you see at least, what is that, 14 different individuals present in that group. And so I just show you that when we talk about commingling, this is what we're talking about. After the war, they didn't have DNA. They tried to put together the remains as best they could. But we now know with DNA that it was actually several different individuals buried as one person. So again, just kind of speaks to the challenge of now instead of one sample, we need at least 14 samples just for this one. And that's one of 429 unknowns that we're talking about. So again, just to speak to the commingling. But yeah,
You'll be creating a every individual fragment because the fragments may have been discarded.
right, absolutely. And so we try to fix the commingling that took place either during the burial or after the war, when the anthropologists after the war tried to separate them. And the only way to fix that now is DNA. So that's one of the reasons it takes so long, is because it's a lot more sample than just starting with one set of remains and trying to figure out. So that's a tricky one because the ship, the Orioca Maroon, sunk where it was in the Philippines. It's still there. It's still a wreck under the water in a pretty active port. You probably saw this in your write-up, but after the war, the Navy sent divers down to look. 2 divers were injured because it was considered apparently very unstable. So after the war, the Navy said, no, this is not safe. I know that there have been cases of recreational diving on the site, essentially illegally. You're not supposed to, but if you look around online, you can find recreational dive shops in the Philippines that have photos of the wreck, which means somebody's gone down there even though you're not allowed to. So for our part, right now we don't have any plans to do that because of the safety, because it's in an active port. And again, we always try to start with what we have. So see who we have from the unknowns and then kind of reevaluate and see if we can do anything to help. Sure, potentially. And robots will be able to get down and take footage of the wreckage. Right now, robots can't do recovery, is the issue. So, but yeah, so you may have seen, in recent years, robotic cameras have taken photos of the Indianapolis and the Titanic and various other things that are way too deep for a human to visit. But with technology, yeah, you never know. Absolutely.
On one of the slides they had downstairs, it said that 44 unknowns have been transitioned to the NE lab. What's the NE lab?
That is the DPA has 2 laboratories. One's in Nebraska, which will be that one.
Okay.
And then the other one is in Honolulu. And right now, normally a project goes to one or the other. Right now, because we're getting so many remains from this project at once, they're at least doing the initial sampling in both locations to try to at least get the initial samples out.
So of the you said 95 were disinterred, so they split them half between Honolulu and half in Nebraska.
I'd have to check. I think right now, yeah, I think that's right. So the first disinterment stayed in Honolulu. The one that took place in January, those were sent to Nebraska.
Okay.
The ones that they're getting now from Manila, I think are going to Nebraska as well.
Letting the families know if you find even just like his uncle was just buried in his family Is that possible?
So what'll happen is they will try to do their best. The lab will try to do their best to get as much of each individual as they can before they do that citation. And then if more of that individual is found later, they again notify the family. And I'll let Paul speak to how notification works, but Yeah, so a family will be notified for whatever. The likelihood of finding all of an individual is fairly low, but they will notify you as soon as we've identified your name. Paul can speak to that.
So as far as the identification works, once AFDL, DPA's laboratory makes an identification, they notify our office. We have a special section in our office called the identification section or ID section. They will reach out to the primary next of kin of dead missing soldier and make a telephonic notification. And then about 30 days or so later, they will fly to your house and bring an Army Casualty Assistance Officer with them and explain to you exactly how he was lost, how he was identified. And then the Casualty Assistance Officer will help you every step through the way from start to finish with the burial process. And the family gets to choose where to bury the soldier. It could be Arlington, it could be a state cemetery, it could be a private cemetery. And that's all up to the family to decide. Yes, sir.
Okay, Captain Walker kept a diary which was found at the prison site, and we have the diary was used in the war crimes trial. We have a copy of it, but the family was hoping that maybe there was some personal effects that were also found at that point. What happened to the original diary? We knew it was used in the war crimes trial. What happened to that? Her mother kept thinking we had the original, but in fact what we have is the accessible.
I've taken photos of each page, but my mom's side of accessible. It's starting to, as paper does, this is typewritten from 1944.
So the original must be someplace in the archives.
Yes, and I can double check. So he was in Cabanix 1. The Cabanix 1 diaries, the rosters, everything that was produced was at the U.S. National Archives in College Park, Maryland. And you can go see those records. They're all publicly available. We've digitized a lot of them and we share digital copies as well. As you said about paper, they have the original, I'm sure. But a lot of times now, a lot of these records, they don't let you see the original anymore. Or you can ask for special permission. They will probably have a copy that you can look at, but they're trying to preserve the original, so they tend not to let you see it. Yeah, we can do that. I can send that to you as well, because we should have it. We tried to scan all of those diaries that were in the National Archives, so I can check. Absolutely.
So I had asked her to break if I could see a copy of it because my grandfather was at the same camp and I was curious if he was mentioned in that diary. So could you give me the site or send a copy of what you have?
We'll do.
Sure. Yeah, I can send out. Yeah, I can send out some information. A lot of this. There are a couple of places that might be. Some of it the National Archives has put on their website, less than you would think, but some of it is on the National Archives website. We have some digital copies which we can share. And the Philippine government, the Philippine Veterans Affairs Office, is trying to compile their own digital records database to keep track of Filipino losses. But in the process, we gave them everything we digitalized. And so the Philippines Veterans Affairs Office also has a lot of this on their website. And you can see a lot of the original records. You can search for file names. So like individual names like Fort Worth would probably come up if they have his diary, for example. And I can share that website through Paul to share with all of you so that we have that. With the art.
Case study that gave me, they had with reference to the war crimes trials, and I was able to get in and read the whole thing.
Yeah, there were, as you can imagine, there were lots of war crimes trials proceedings about the prisoners in the Philippines and about the hell ships and so forth. Yeah.
Would the archives also have records of any of the what they were doing
So how do I
before they were
get sure my main point of contact in this effort?
you know,
That's
as
cool.
part of what the units were up to
And
doing?
if I have any further questions, I can email
Is there a way
you.
to get information on that?
There is, that's a little trickier because it takes a little more digging. I can also let you know, I can let you all know, we have a few minutes. So if in terms of particular units, if there's a book that's particularly useful or if there's a unit history in the archives, everyone's free to get it, but that's not easy to get if you don't live in Maryland. So I can share what we have. So if you are able to catch me now and ask, I can take that down. Or if you notify Paul, send him an email later, I can get you whatever we can find in terms of unit records. Things like that.
Is your email, I mean, we have the letter from you, but is
Yeah, if you just request it from me and then I'll get it from him and I'll send it back.
Yeah, we try to keep all the communications through the Army just for the sake of everybody having the same visibility. And in your case summaries, we try to give you a little bit of information, but we can give you some of the original documents as well. And you had asked about personal effects. That was the other question. So if your family did not receive them right after the war, any personal effects that didn't get back to a family after the war were consolidated in it was called the Personal Effects Bureau in Kansas City. And after a certain amount of time, any effects that weren't able to get back to a family, those effects were destroyed. So unfortunately, we can't really do anything about personal effects anymore at this point.
I can send it. I can send it to you. What's the soldier's name? Last name?
hard for me here.
What's the soldier's last name?
His name?
Okay, I'll make a note.
So anyone who died in World War II got an individual deceased personnel file. Those we've digitized, and through Paul's office we can get those. We can get those to you. That's pretty easy. Everyone also had an official military personnel file, which is also a record of their training, their medical stuff, etc. Those are a little tougher. You can request those from the National Personnel Records Office. And
You can request it through me, but those records are tricky as well because probably 98 out of 100 times when I request the records, I want to get like 1 or 2 pages back that are useless information. And then like 2 out of 100 times we get really lucky and get a whole bunch of stuff. So, but I will order what I can, and whatever I can, I will scan those in and email those to you.
And the difficulty with those in particular is in the early 70s, that office had a fire that destroyed most of the Army records for World War II. So and they've tried to reconstruct them. They're still trying to reconstruct them, but it's a lot. That's why I say it's a lot trickier. We know you have an IDTF. OMPFs are a little bit tricky.
How do we update who the primary?
Just give me a call, sir. Just give me a call and then I'll update it. You just send it to me in an email as well. Like this morning, saying like this person lives here now and your phone number and email address. And,
She actually passed away.
okay.
One thing to note for the families, when you start talking about primary next of kin, the Army really makes a determination about who the primary next of kin is based upon our genealogy research and the law. And one thing that's challenging is at times, it's not the person that's the most interesting. It is the person that by law is the oldest living person. And so it starts out as federal law and then goes to state laws. So once you get to nieces, nephews, and cousins, it goes by the state law of where the service member entered service. Not where he lived, or not where he was born, or where he entered service from. And so we go back to that state law, and it's their basic laws of succession.
And so one thing that can happen, and the reason I brought it up, sir, is based on your question, once an individual passes, what can oftentimes happen is it may go to the other side of the family. It's not been involved, and, but that's the way the law is written, and that's the way we have to do it. So we go right down literally by the laws of succession for the next primary next of kin. We will always talk to the family, no matter where you're at in that line. We'll always talk to you, we'll provide you the information and everything else. But the decisions for primary next of kin, once we make an identification, that's where that becomes important, because that's the person who makes a decision on where the individual is buried, how they're buried, casket, cremation, etc. All of those decisions are made by that primary next of kin. That's where it becomes important.
Good question. So, reading through the bio, the Army, it was like the Army Bureau of Graves or some organization like that, declared his death December 15th, 1944. But then there were other pieces of records from testimonies from American servicemen who saw him on other ships, and actually translations of Japanese records that indicated he lived some amount of time after that, and that date of death was never corrected. Will that, and so I guess two questions. It appears that somehow he survived to go on each of those Maru ships and eventually died from infection on shrapnel on the Brazil Maru. Will the fact that the Army declared he was dead before at that time, actually they did it based on the attack on the initial Nora, will that impact his identification at all?
And this is a perfect example of why we're assuming anybody who got on the first ship could be a candidate for any remains anywhere in the whole process. So he will not be ruled out of anything. And the reason for that is that the Japanese, they did report through the Red Cross over the summer the individuals who died on these three ships. But when they did it, they reported everybody as having died in the first attack on December 15th, 1944. As a result, a lot of the paperwork for virtually everyone has the initial date of death as December 15th, 1944. Later on, when they received eyewitness testimony or on the rosters that the prisoners created, they corrected a lot of those, not all, but they corrected a lot. But that's why there's usually most people lost in there have at least 2 reports of death for them. But that's why we're casting this wide net and not ruling anybody out.
And when you look at the deceased personnel files, you will see that likely in there. You will see multiple documents reporting death, and they will actually go in and change the actual date of death. And that sequence is there in paper on those records.
So I had another question. One of the things that we wanted to get, we were hoping to get, was a service photo, but it sounds like they probably didn't digitize it before that Kansas fire, and that's probably where, if it had existed, where it was destroyed.
Right. Yeah, and that's actually I'm glad you asked us that, because a lot of times that's what we ask you all: is do you have photos? Because we are trying to, and we have Miss Tina Schmidt is from our Outreach and Communications office, and she coordinates trying to get photos for all of our missing. So if you do have a photo, please talk to Tina. She's trying to collect those.
Also send it to me. Yeah, unfortunately the Army didn't keep records of photos till the Vietnam War. So all the families that you see is what family members provided to us. So if you have a picture of your missing soldier, please send it to me. Thank you.
That is an ongoing challenge. That we're always asking for help with that as well. Any other questions or concerns or?
Well, I was talking about digitalizing the records. My family kept a lot of stuff, and but they have the postcards that they sent letters back and forth. Are you interested in that, or is that just your family?
Yeah, if you'd like to share it, it would be. I'd like to see it. If you had photos of those things, you can get to Paul's office. Yeah, we'll put it in his file and kind of take a look.
He was at Penn State grad, and they just did an exhibit at their sports museum. He lettered in riflery, and they did an exhibit about Letterman in World War. Letterman from Penn State in World War II. So I photographed a lot of stuff and sent it to him. So I got stuff I can send.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, I don't know if he's in here, but one of our analysts, his great uncle actually died at Camp O'Donnell. He was on the Death March and died at Camp O'Donnell. And he had been a football player at Rutgers prior to the war. So I know that Rutgers did a similar kind of write-up on him. And there were a really oddly large number of professional football players on the Bataan Death March, actually. There were several who, and they lost like 100 pounds over the course of the war. But there are several cases of professional athletes or college athletes who just got out of college and went into the Army who were in the Philippines. So we see a lot of universities.
Yeah, so I have a question. So in prior case reports, let me back up. So in this case report, there's been additional information that kind of corroborates some of my prior research, but there's also like a change in here about my grandfather's military service, which does not seem correct, and plus it's in the military records that had been sent before. It said that he had retired from the military for 5 years, but I have his records from before that shows continuous service. So what would account for a change like that, and how do we get something like that corrected?
Sure.
That would go to the Army Board of Records.
Okay.
And it takes a year for them to make a decision because they get so much volume.
Yeah.
And they have a board, panel members, and then they get the vote on it, and then they give you a response.
So is that something I should send to you then?
Well, and
scan it?
You would send that to them yourself. I can get you the address,
Okay.
and then you would send it to the Army Board of Corrections.
Okay.
And we can update our case summary. If you send us
Yeah.
or show us what you have, we can update the case summary to reflect what you have as well. That may be that we had a gap in kind of what we had separate
Okay.
from his official record. So we may have missed part of his service. But if you're willing to share what you have,
Yeah.
we can
Well,
update
this
the
is
case summary.
from you from a number of years ago.
Okay.
Yeah, these are ones that we provided. These are, in fact, that's part, looks like part of the UMPF. Yeah, and if I could borrow for a second. Sure. This is what you see when you see files from the National Archives, and you'll see they're singed, oftentimes water damage, and so some did survive, but a lot of, my dad's right, he's a World War II veteran. Yeah, his records didn't survive, so.
I have noticed that the summary from, we went to one, like probably about 2 years ago, and the summary do have more details, so I think we all appreciate as you get little other tidbits of information, you update the story.
Our pleasure. And Dr. Justiniano should take more than a little credit for that. She is a dogged researcher who keeps finding more information and little tidbits of information as well. So we try to add in whatever we can. But I'm not going to take all the credit for that. And I should also mention Dr. Jim Rose, who's standing here, actually did a lot of the research that went into the original proposal for the disinterment. So he played a very active role in this as well.
This is our first one.
You're veteran.
You need to come to Georgia.
We will. We get back to it. Oh yeah, we haven't been to Georgia in a while. Last time was like 7 years ago in Atlanta.
Well, we're in South Georgia.
Okay.
So come back.
That's to Jacksonville, right? Jacksonville.
Well, Jacksonville would be all right.
Okay.
Brunswick.
So if other questions occur to anyone today and you're able to catch one of us, we'd be happy to answer them. Otherwise, if you think of questions later on, have other questions or comments, or just want a status update,
What
if
about
you
the
contact Paul's
medals
office.
that they would have
want gotten, is there some way the family can get those
I'm sorry.
medals?
Medals.
Yes, I'll speak of the medals. So if anybody wants to get their missing soldiers awards listing, send me an email. It takes about 6 to 9 months to get an awards listing back. It can be quicker, just depending on the awards branch. I'll send all the records to the awards branch. They will go through the fine-tooth comb and find out exactly what medals, all the awards that your missing soldier was authorized. And then if you wish to purchase the medals, let me know in that email as well. That way I can put the purchase request in it, because you will get these medals at a great significant discount. You will get them at U.S. government cost. So if you wish to get those medals and then a copy of the awards listing, send me an email, please, and that way I can put the request in.
We've got, has the price
So it looks like you already got, this is,
we didn't get it, they just sent it to us.
okay, so they just sent this to you, okay?
Sent to my nephew.
Yeah, so this is what you will get. It will show you exactly all the medals that you would, the soldier was authorized, how much they cost, so, and her nephew would have to send in $45 to get all of these medals, so which is very cheap to get all these medals.
And the price hasn't changed from when that was printed.
No. That is it. That includes the Purple Heart, the Bronze Star, all kinds of
A collector of military memorabilia has our great uncle's medal. How do we? And he said he did it to be the caretaker of this great Floridian. We don't know we don't have a name or anything. Someone just a number.
Yes.
So a collector has received it.
Yes, the family must have donated.
Nobody came and had it. But we know it. What we're all
They must have. They would have. The mom or the dad or the wife. Yeah, so you would have to purchase. You're a niece, right? Great. So send me an email saying I want an awards listing and purchase the medals. So and you can do that. You can, the family member can request up to 3 purchase requests. So you can purchase, total of 3 sets.
Sure. You said it records award listing and something submitted?
Purchase request, purchase of medals.
Oh, perfect. Okay, I misheard. Purchase of medals.
Can only get
It's a
3
maximum
sets.
of 3.
3 cents.
So send me an email saying, yeah, award listing, and I want to purchase 2 sets of medals, one for you and one for Now I'll put the request in, and
You can only get 3 sets.
it could take up to a year, but you will get the medals.
Quick question about the actual name of the camp that they've been in. We have some records of Red Cross postcards that were allowed to be sent home. And they all say he's in Philippine POW camp number 2. And that's it. Now somehow, I think a good doctor may have figured out that was Davao.
Davao, yep.
Davao? Is that correct?
Yes, so Davao is in the southern Philippines. There was a penal colony there that was turned into a POW camp. And there were, a lot prisoners would sometimes transfer between Cabanatuan, Davao. There was a camp in Bilibid Prison in Manila. And in addition to work details, some prisoners kind of bounced across. I ever thought if I had lots of free time, I would like to try to find a pattern in how they did this, because you would see post-war testimony from prisoners. They would list to the Army investigators what camps they were at from what dates, and these guys were just being shipped all over the place. So
That was what was so confusing. I'd never realized he was in Davao. I always knew he was in Bilibid and maybe Camp O'Donnell and the Cabanatuan, because of stories from survivors that have come back and shared their story with the wife. It was like, okay, so they did transfer him.
Quite a bit, and like I said, if there's a rhyme or reason, I haven't seen it. I've often wondered, but it would take a lot of trying to analyze the patterns and figure out if they were just moving people or what the story was. But there was a lot of internal movement prior to being shipped out for Japan. Absolutely.
My guess is they were the healthy ones because he supposedly was healthy the whole time.
Yeah, that was some of it. And then the healthy ones were sent to different work details, and then ultimately they tried to send them to Japan. Other than it's a fairly small number, only a few hundred were left in Cabana 2 when it was liberated, because the ones deemed healthy enough were sent out to try to get them back to work.
So they were walking.
Yeah. Yes, Marty.
Because the Japanese are trying to construct larger airplanes in Davao, so they needed more people to build the airplane. So they ended up shipping healthy body prisoners from Cabanatuan, and the Philippine prison is basically just a transfer. So some of them stayed there because the main hospital is in Philippines. So, but they ended up just going there and then being shipped to different POW camps across the Philippines, and the main one is Cabanatuan, and then Davao, and then the different work detail POW camps. So that's the reason why they ended up just moving all over. But yeah, like Greg said, it's going to be an interesting project to just figure out who they picked, why they're being picked, and where they ended up.
So if you forget to ask any questions, just send me an email and we'll get them answered for you.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Oh, thank you all. You did good. None of this without you guys. Thank you.
And thank you all, because your research and your DNA is what we need to get the rest of the story. So we appreciate it.
I think what you might do is if you